I insisted on a divorce, and as a result, my ex-husband suddenly found success and ended up with my best friend. Meanwhile, I ended up working as a waitress, juggling 3 jobs just to survive. We crossed paths again at an upscale club. My friend, with a tinge of regret, remarked, "If you hadn't pushed for the divorce, you'd be living the good life now. It's unfortunate your luck always seems to miss the mark." He looked completely indifferent, holding his new wife's hand as though I didn't even exist, giving the impression that he had left me at the bottom of the pile. Everyone was jeering, putting me down. I knew Brandon Davis was waiting for me to embarrass myself to see if I regretted my choices, but I remained composed, like a bystander. Placing the fruit platter down, I calmly said, "Everything is set. There's nothing else needed, so I'll take my leave now." Brandon looked unsettled, rising to block my path. This was the 6th year since our divorce, and here we were, meeting again. He was still bitter about me leaving and seemed to want an explanation. No one ever really understood why I ended the marriage. To our family and friends, we were the perfect couple, receiving everyone's blessing when we wed. Though we weren't wealthy, Brandon's dedication to the family was praised by everyone. Even my parents questioned me, saying, "Anley Smith, Brandon is such a good man. What more could you want?" When I declared I wanted a divorce, they all thought I was undeserving. My mother slapped me, and my father threatened to disown me. Still, I left Brandon without hesitation. Now, as I looked at the well-dressed man before me, I smiled faintly. "Even if you're a billionaire now, leaving you was still the right decision," I said. I didn't plan on explaining myself to anyone. "It's been 6 years, and you've never realized your mistakes. I admire how thick-skinned you are. You have no idea how much I suffered in that marriage." Right after we married, Brandon sold our home without informing me. When I returned from a business trip, I found our hallway filled with luggage. That's when it hit me. I no longer had a home. Exhausted and confused, I called him to ask what had happened. He impatiently replied, "My cousin's daughter-in-law needs surgery, and their family. What's wrong with me selling the house to help?" I wasn't against helping, but I believed we should stay within our means. We had only recently married, and our life was already tight. We had saved together for that house. How could he sell it without telling me? Under the scorching sun, I dragged the heavy bags, not knowing where to go next. My frustration and tears only seemed to annoy Brandon. "All you do is cry. The house is sold. What else do you want? I'll buy you a villa someday, okay?" he said before hanging up and going on vacation. I was heartbroken, thinking he was house hunting. But to my shock, he spent that time caring for his cousin's wife in the hospital, a woman I barely knew. Everyone praised him, calling him a good man. Even if he was exhausted after working overtime, he'd still help neighbors search for a lost cat. But he never considered my needs. He wouldn't come home until the cat was found. Before we got married, I thought these little acts of kindness reflected his good heart. But over time, it became clear that his kindness was for everyone but me. 3 months after selling our home, we were living in a cramped apartment. Around that time, I got pregnant. The doctor warned me the baby's position was risky and advised bed rest for 3 months. I used my annual leave to follow the doctor's orders, but Brandon accused me of being lazy, influenced by his aunt's opinion. He brought several sick elderly relatives to live with us in our tiny rental and expected me to care for them. The house felt like a chaotic market every day. My head pounded from the noise, and clutter piled up everywhere, making the living room unbearable. I finally reached my breaking point and asked his relatives to leave. Brandon was furious, yelling, "They're my family. Without them, I wouldn't have a place to live. You married me, so it's your duty to care for them." Glaring at the messy room, he added, "I'll bring them back. Clean up the house and mop the floor." He slammed the door behind him. Moments later, a neighbor passed by, shaking his head and muttering, "You're just pregnant. How can you not handle housework? No wonder Brandon is so mad." Brandon was well liked by everyone. Whenever we had a disagreement, outsiders always believed I was the unreasonable one. At the time, I was so stressed that I lost 80 pounds and looked like a skeleton. I ignored what people said and constantly tried to compromise with him. The doctor advised me to rest, and considering our poor financial situation, we couldn't afford to support his relatives. I never understood why he insisted on bringing them to the city. Our place was tiny, and we often slept on the floor while his relatives had a comfortable home in the countryside with fields. I calmly reasoned with him, saying, "Brandon, even if you give them half of your paycheck every month, I won't complain. But their presence is seriously affecting our lives." He refused to listen, believing I was heartless, and ignored me for a long time. It wasn't until I became dangerously thin and the baby's development was so poor that the doctor recommended ending the pregnancy that he finally agreed to send his relatives away. But by then, it was too late. For the sake of my health, I chose to follow the doctor's advice and terminate the pregnancy. Brandon was furious. "I already sent them away. Just eat more rice at each meal and get fat. There's no way the baby won't grow," he shouted. His words left me speechless. It was like I was seeing a stranger. The doctor told me the baby was underdeveloped and that continuing the pregnancy could endanger my life. If he had been thinking rationally, he wouldn't have said such shocking things. At that moment, I felt completely numb, knowing there was no point in trying to communicate with him. I made the decision to have the abortion on my own. When I returned home, pale and exhausted, he slapped me across the face and I froze. Later, Brandon yelled, "Ansley Smith, you're heartless. Give me back my child." The whole neighborhood found out about the incident. People came to console Brandon, but their eyes held contempt for me. Some judgmental busybodies sneered. How sad for Brandon. He just wanted a child. This is why a man needs to marry a virtuous wife. Otherwise, good deeds go unrewarded. Brandon could have explained the truth, but he didn't. Instead, he basked in the sympathy. Disappointment filled me as I looked at those hypocritical people. "When will you stop pretending, Brandon?" I asked. "No one feels the pain I do, especially over the child. It's not my fault. Why did someone like you get married just to make others suffer? I don't want to be in the way of your so-called love anymore. Let's get a divorce." I packed my belongings, prepared to leave, and slapped him before walking out. He clutched his reddened cheek and didn't try to stop me. Others were already stepping in to defend him. First, my parents confronted me, questioning and scolding me. "What did Brandon do wrong? This is your fault. Why did you abort the baby without telling anyone? Of course, he's angry. Besides, what son-in-law takes his mother-in-law shopping every weekend? Just last week, when I coughed, he bought medicine and made soup for me. He cares for me like his own child. You're not allowed to lose your temper with him again." I ignored their criticism. Finally, my father gave an ultimatum. "Move back home today and apologize to Brandon, or our relationship is over." Then there was my best friend, Daphne Clark. She still felt grateful to Brandon for driving her home thousands of miles once. She sided with my parents and said, "Ansley, you're clearly in the wrong. Marriage has made you selfish. You can't be so arrogant." Even my closest friend thought Brandon was a good man. Since our marriage, I hadn't received any kindness from him. He could donate a month's salary to a stray animal shelter or eagerly volunteer for community events, leaving me behind. During a typhoon, our windows cracked, and I was terrified. He answered a call and said he had to keep a female neighbor company. When I told him I was scared, he dismissed me, saying, "What's there to be afraid of? Are you still a child?" Despite the storm, he left. Even when he was injured by the wind, he got up and pushed through the pain to go help his friend. Another time, he promised to go with me to a prenatal checkup, but ran off to dinner with his friends instead. There were so many instances like this that I lost count. At times, I felt like I wasn't worth anything. Daphne frowned in disapproval and said, "Ansley, I can't support you this time. No matter what, you shouldn't have gotten an abortion." I looked at their judgmental faces and silently pulled out the test report. The doctor informed me that the baby was unhealthy and couldn't be delivered. This wasn't a choice I made alone to end the pregnancy. "You're just like Brandon. You don't care about my feelings at all." When they saw the evidence, they fell silent and finally settled down. However, while Brandon and I were finding some peace, Daphne took advantage of the situation. She claimed that her breast cancer was terminal and asked Brandon to be part of a wedding photo shoot with her. "My life is nearly over, and my last wish is to take wedding pictures. I just need a groom," she said, giving me a sly wink. "Ansley, can I borrow your husband for a bit? You won't mind, right?" How could Brandon say no? How could he care about my feelings when he had a reputation as the neighborhood's good guy? They went to the beach and took stunning wedding photos. Afterward, Daphne wanted more. "Ansley, can I hang these wedding photos on the wall in your living room? I just want to experience what it's like to have a husband before I go," she asked tearfully. In the photo, Brandon held her waist and gently nibbled her lower lip. They looked like a real couple. I couldn't refuse, so Brandon agreed on my behalf. He always got involved in other people's issues with so much enthusiasm. He took the entire afternoon off to buy tools and nails, then hung up the picture of him and Daphne. I watched silently from the sidelines and asked, "Is there anywhere else I can be?" Brandon shot me a hateful glare, filled with resentment I couldn't understand. Suppressing my frustration, I watched as he fussed over Daphne, asking, "Daphne, do the pictures look okay? Let me know if you want any changes." They completely ignored my presence. Daphne bit her finger thoughtfully and then pointed toward our room. "Anley, can you take down your wedding photo with Brandon? I'd like to hang my picture there." She looked so innocent, as if there was nothing wrong with her request. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Had I misjudged people or had time changed them? Brandon didn't give me a chance to refuse. "Of course," he said, full of righteous indignation. He got to work quickly but carelessly knocked our wedding photo to the floor, shattering the glass and frame. My heart broke along with it. In that instant, I realized I no longer wanted Brandon in my life. That day, my silence seemed to unsettle him. Brandon sensed something was wrong, but merely said, "Daphne is sick. Don't take it so seriously. Can't you be gentle like me?" I didn't argue. Instead, I quietly packed my things, ignoring everyone's criticisms, and decided to file for divorce. At first, Brandon refused to sign the papers, so I met with Daphne privately and pleaded, "I know you're not really sick. You just love Brandon and want to be close to him. I'm giving him to you. Just convince him to divorce me the right way." Everything went smoothly after that. On the day of the divorce, Brandon looked a bit guilty. "I didn't realize all Daphne wanted was to marry me," he said. Given her supposed condition, he agreed to marry her. As we left the civil office, he pulled me aside and said, "Anley, after she dies, we'll get married again. This is just temporary." I didn't respond. I walked down the broad street, put on my sunglasses, and smiled as I welcomed a new chapter of my life. To start fresh in another city for work, I cut off contact with him and our mutual friends. My parents were furious, declaring they no longer saw me as their daughter. They even moved in with Brandon, selling my only home to fund his business venture. Over time, they seemed to forget I was their real child. Being betrayed by those you love naturally brings pain. Through my tears, I asked my parents, "I'm your daughter. What did I do wrong?" My mother had undergone several surgeries and owed hundreds of thousands in medical bills, which I had worked tirelessly to pay off. I had also settled my father's gambling debts by borrowing money everywhere. I'd always tried to be a good daughter. How could they disown me over such a small favor for Brandon when I had done so much for them? Dad's answer was, "At least Brandon fulfills my requests. You get angry when I want to play mahjong. You humiliate me in front of my gambling friends." Mom also complained, "I like greasy food, so what if my arteries are clogged? It's my problem. What's the point of living if you can't enjoy food?" Brandon would never treat us this way. Living with Brandon made them happier. Thinking about this, my tears stopped and I felt a sense of calm. In the 6 years since the divorce, I finally began to heal. I dedicated myself to my career, and my life was fulfilling. If I hadn't run into Brandon again, I would have almost forgotten the past entirely. Brandon kept asking, "Anley, what did I do wrong?" I answered, "I told you I'd remarry you after Daphne passed away. You're the one who cut off everyone and turned our relationship into this mess." He carried an air of seriousness, and to others, my departure seemed like an overblown reaction. Brandon frowned, hugged Daphne tightly, and confidently said, "Daphne and I are truly together now. There's no chance you can come back to me." Daphne added, "Even if Brandon builds a successful business, it's funded with your parents' savings. It has nothing to do with you." I laughed, completely indifferent. Just then, the door opened and a voice called out, "Anley, I just brought some fruit. Why were you taking so long?" "I ran into some old friends and stopped to chat," I replied. The person who entered was Ethan Wilson, a club shareholder and my fiancé. My family owns a travel business with projects nationwide, and since the divorce, I've worked for the Wilson Family Company. Ethan and I are genuinely happy together. The rumors about me working 3 jobs daily aren't true. My actual job involves checking 3 branches each day, occasionally helping out as a waitress, but my shifts never go beyond 5 hours. Brandon sensed something was off and stopped me. "Anley, can we talk for a minute?" he asked. His arrogant attitude was frustrating. I looked him in the eye and said bluntly, "We broke up a long time ago. I don't want anything to do with you." Brandon was visibly insulted but still persisted. "Come on, it doesn't have to be this way. Where are you living now? Add me on WeChat. When you're back in Beijing, I can help you find a place to stay and a good job." Daphne, trying to maintain her image, feigned generosity and said, "Anley, don't be so stubborn. You're over 30. Do you want to be a waitress forever?" Thanks for your concern, but it doesn't matter what kind of job it is. I don't think my work is beneath me, I calmly replied. Ethan gazed at me warmly and took my hand in his. This display of affection made Brandon visibly uncomfortable. Anley, who is he? Brandon asked, his face neutral, though his clenched fist gave away his anger. He's my fiancé, I said bluntly. I turned to leave, but paused and called to another waitress. Sister, give the guests in this room some wedding candy. Ethan and I are getting married soon, so anyone who spends money here will get complimentary wedding treats. The Wilson family's reputation was well known, so Brandon and Daphne instantly recognized Ethan. They didn't expect me to be involved with such a wealthy family. Soon after, Brandon began showing up frequently. Even when he had a high fever, he'd still bring me roasted ginkgo nuts, my supposed favorite. Anley, I made these ginkgo nuts for you the other day. I remember you used to love them, he said. I sighed and replied, I never really liked them. I only took the free ones to save you money. Then, with a teasing tone, I added, you should know whether I actually liked them or not. He did know, but never cared enough to find out. Ginkgo nuts are everywhere in Yingen, and free things always appealed to him. Brandon awkwardly held the bag, unsure of what to do with it. After a moment of silence, guilt showed on his face. I'm sorry I didn't take better care of you before. If there's still a chance, I'd like to get to know you again. Can't you just forget about marrying Ethan? He pleaded. For the first time, I saw real regret in his eyes, like he'd lost something precious. Tears welled up as he admitted, Daphne lied. She was never sick. Our marriage isn't even valid. In my heart, you've always been my wife, Anley. He confessed he had been deceived for 6 years, wanting a divorce the entire time. Daphne always makes things seem so urgent. After being with her, I realize how good you are. She doesn't let me see my family or do anything I want. Even if I drive a female coworker to work, she scolds me in public. Brandon had always wanted to be a hero, to be admired. He would rather neglect his own family to earn praise from others. Daphne, who once received his help, fell for his false heroism and did everything to steal him from me. But even now, she was still trying to control him. I didn't care about any of it. Standing up, I said, sorry, I'm meeting my fiancée to try on wedding dresses. Brandon seemed to have more to say, but I cut him off, and a brief look of frustration crossed his face. Ethan is a cynical man who doesn't suit you, Brandon argued. Marrying him will only bring you misery in the future. He was doing everything he could to stop me from getting married. As I looked at him, he seemed like a ridiculous clown. He studied me and said, Anley, why don't you come back to me? I'll buy a home in the nicest area of Yanjing so you can live comfortably. Some men truly believe women will abandon their lives to become unworthy mistresses. Even if Ethan disappoints me one day, he has given me solid security before our marriage. If we end up divorcing, I'll still walk away with a house and a substantial sum of money. I trust the man who sincerely asked me to marry him. I picked up my phone and turned on the speaker. I had called Daphne as soon as Brandon entered the room. Her hysterical voice rang out. Brandon, do you think I'll let you be with Anley? As long as I'm alive, that will never happen. She soon arrived, dragged Brandon away, and finally I had a few peaceful days. I selected my wedding dress, reserved the hotel, and the wedding date was drawing near. I never expected my parents to show up. We hadn't spoken in 6 years, and they looked much older without my care. Left to their own devices, their lives had gotten worse. My father's gambling had escalated. He stayed out all night, accumulating debt, and eventually suffered a minor stroke due to a brain hemorrhage. My mother ate excessively, causing her body to swell. When she saw me, she broke down in tears and staggered over. Anley, how could you be so heartless? No matter how much you hated us, you should have let go by now, she sobbed. The table was soon filled with their sorrowful complaints about my secret marriage. I stood there embarrassed. My father, choked with emotion, accused me. If Brandon hadn't told us, would you have hidden this forever? I coldly led them backstage and said bluntly, who was it that cut ties in the first place? I respected your choice, so why are you pretending to care now? Instead of accusing me of being unfilial, maybe ask yourselves if you've been good parents. If you had come after the wedding, I could have forgiven you. Showing up now, crying and causing a scene, just embarrasses me. My mother said nothing and instead turned to Ethan, speaking softly. Son, listen to me. Anley might not be the right woman for you. You should call off the wedding while you still can. That's right, my father added. Anley was married before and she even terminated her pregnancy. She might not be healthy enough to have children. They were determined to ruin the happiness I had fought so hard for. But they underestimated Ethan. His face turned serious and cold. Not only do you ignore Anley's past suffering, but you use it to smear her? How could you be so cruel? He shot back. My parents tried to argue, but Ethan cut them off. Enough. If you're here to celebrate, sit down and have a drink. Otherwise, I'll have you escorted out. They exchanged uneasy glances, realizing their real motive. I knew they had come to plead for Brandon. Sure enough, my mother said, Anley, I'm not against you remarrying, but think about Brandon. He's been waiting for you all these years. Your father and I just want you two to reconcile. The first marriage is always the best. You're still young. You'll regret not listening to us. I remembered how Brandon had thrown them out after his marriage. Now they lived in a tiny place, struggling and depending on others. If I reconciled with Brandon, they would have a reason for him to support them. I didn't argue. Instead, I said firmly, you have a choice. If you leave now, I'll take care of you. But if you keep causing trouble, I'll have you removed. And if you make me angry, neither Brandon nor I will support you. Realizing they wouldn't get me back with Brandon, they hesitated. They retreated to the bathroom to talk, then returned, deciding to back down. To secure their future, they even drafted a contract promising to behave. Once that was settled, the wedding proceeded smoothly. After the honeymoon, I hired a lawyer to sue Brandon. He had manipulated my parents into selling their home to fund his business, only to abandon them later. I knew winning the lawsuit wasn't guaranteed, but I would keep going to ensure he wouldn't find peace. The pressure became too much for Daphne. She confronted me saying, Anley, your parents gave Brandon the money willingly. No one forced them. You should drop the lawsuit. Now that we were both wealthy wives, if I stirred up trouble, I wouldn't just lose face. The Wilson family's reputation would suffer too. Over the years, her life seemed to have gone downhill. Her expression grew more hostile, as if she were on the verge of an outburst. I quietly observed her, trying to comprehend what had happened. Finally, I asked softly, I've always wondered, why did you treat me that way? We were best friends for 15 years. Why did you betray me for a man? And in such a cruel way? Compared to what Brandon did to me, your betrayal hurt the most. I felt lost, thinking things shouldn't have ended up like this. Daphne's face darkened, and tears welled up in her eyes. You think you're so innocent? I met Brandon first and confessed to him before you did. He turned me down, but he still enjoyed it when I kissed him. If it hadn't been for you, we would have ended up together. You showed up out of nowhere, and he started avoiding me. By the time I realized what was happening, you two were already a couple. Do you know how much I despise you? I swore that if I couldn't have Brandon, you wouldn't get him either. I froze. I had no idea that this had happened. If I'd known about her history with Brandon, I never would have interfered. Furious, I said, you have no right to blame me for something I knew nothing about. And you dare to hate me? You knew Brandon was keeping secrets, yet you let me fall into this trap. For years, I was in the dark. The shame I feel is unbearable. It cuts like a knife. Nausea suddenly overwhelmed me. Daphne's voice turned icy. If I'd told you, would you have left Brandon for me? I doubt you're that noble. How do you know I wouldn't have? I replied, disappointment etched on my face. Other than myself, you were the person I cared about the most. My parents didn't show me much love growing up, and you were the first to treat me with kindness. I've always appreciated those who were good to me. You underestimated how loyal I am to my friends. If I'd known Brandon was the one you loved, I would never have gotten involved. Daphne's clever scheming had brought misery to both of us. I could only smile bitterly. She probably never imagined I would prioritize friendship over romance. Her expression softened slightly. I kept my polite smile and added, if I hadn't discovered the truth, I might have let it go for your sake. But that won't happen now. Brandon dared to humiliate me like this, and it's infuriating. I knew he enjoyed helping others, so I gathered all my relatives and went to borrow money from him. Meanwhile, posts about his good deeds flooded the internet. People he had helped showed up at his house demanding assistance. They shouted things like, good man, my child needs tuition money, or I'm dying, can you pay for my treatment? Some even resorted to blackmail, saying, I only need one of your kidneys. Brandon is a hero, he won't refuse. Had the police not arrived in time, the crowd might have dragged him away. Terrified, Brandon fled to a foreign country, but people tracked him down relentlessly. Desperate, he turned to me for help. You always wanted to be a hero, I told him. Now so many people need you. Why are you hiding like a stray dog? This isn't like you. During this period, I also realized he only helped people who benefited him. He paid special attention to women and those who made him look good. The praise he received from neighbors gave him satisfaction. Now, stripped of that admiration, his desire to help had vanished. Brandon was speechless at my words. I didn't say more and handed him a contract. Either return the money my parents got from selling their house, or I'll keep sending people to bother you. And it won't just be your home, it'll be your workplace too. I gently touched my flat stomach and smiled. I'm expecting a baby, so I have plenty of time to deal with you. When Brandon learned I was pregnant, he couldn't handle it. He gave a bitter smile as tears streamed down his face. Anley, I've really lost you. How did it come to this? I've always loved you. Marrying Daphne was just an act. Can't you forgive me? He looked utterly defeated, but I remained cold and indifferent. After a long silence, he finally signed the contract. Seeing how little I cared about him, his demeanor also turned icy. I received the money from the sale of the house and deposited it into my own account. I gave my parents just 50,000 yuan a month to live on, preventing my father from gambling it away. My mother began overeating and drinking heavily. When they found out what I had done, they were furious. They believed I was too cruel to Brandon. We chose to sell the house to help Brandon with his business, they insisted. We never wanted the money back. He's a good person and deserves all our support, they insisted. I shot back. If he's so great, why did he throw you out? You handed all your money to Brandon and now expect your own daughter to care for you in your old age. Isn't that unfair to me? Am I really so worthless to you? I'm not someone you can push around. If necessary, I'll take this to court. I can give you the bare minimum to survive. I've heard that foster care expenses can be covered by food. I have no problem buying you a few hundred buns each month. Hearing this, my parents fell completely silent. Plenty of children refused to support their parents, let alone an ex-son-in-law. How could Brandon possibly agree to take care of his ex-in-laws? Once they realized this, they started treating me better. In an attempt to repair our relationship, they suggested I move to their city so they could care for me during my pregnancy. I declined. I believed that forcing people with strained relationships to live together would only lead to unhappiness for everyone involved. 6 months later, Brandon reappeared in my life. He looked defeated and spoke to me in a subdued voice. To finalize the divorce, I let Daphne leave with a clean break, but before that, I secretly donated all my assets. We both deserve how things turned out, but I feel a long-lost sense of freedom, like I can face anything now. Daphne is too ashamed to see you, so I'm apologizing on her behalf. I'm the one who destroyed your friendship. It's all my fault. I'm truly sorry. Brandon took a deep breath, summoned his courage, and grasped my hand. With sincerity, he asked, Anley, can we try again? Would it be too much to ask you to leave Ethan? If there's still a chance for us, even if it's just for the baby you're carrying, I'll raise it as my own. I was left speechless, a bitter smile on my face. I couldn't comprehend why he would say such things. I have no lingering feelings for my ex. If I don't love someone, I just don't. All I remember is the injustice I suffered. Even now, I can't forgive Brandon for what he did. Ansley, he said, his voice softening, I don't want to help anyone else anymore. I'll put my family first. I won't let you feel alone again, and I won't abandon you in a typhoon. At the end of his plea, he covered his face and wept, knowing deep down that no matter how many promises he made, there was no way back. I didn't feel like mocking him. I simply waited silently for his tears to stop. When Ethan arrived to pick me up for dinner, I stood up, turned around, and walked away.